Kia ora koutou katoa, ko John Reid taku ingoa. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Tāwara o Te Wai. I'm John Reid from Water New Zealand. Today we're going to talk about economic regulation and how it might be applied to the water industry in Aotearoa. This follows on from both the pre-conference workshop and conference, which both had sessions about regulation. And sort of as a health warning, it's being recorded before we've got visibility of the next water bill, but we do have some guidance of what might be coming from the cabinet paper. So to discuss this important area, we're joined by Andy Burgess from the Commerce Commission. And of course, as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Hannah Edmond. Kia ora, Hannah and Andy.
Kia ora. John.
Thanks for joining us today. So I sort of grew up, if you like, in the regulated water industry in the UK, and I'm really looking forward to talking more about how this might come about in Aotearoa. So maybe, Hannah, over to you.
Thanks, John, and welcome, Andy. It's great to have you here. I guess maybe we start right back at the beginning for those who are a bit new to economic regulation. Can you explain to us what it actually is?
Essentially, it's about influencing behaviour. The origins of economic regulation start with competition. So traditionally, where there are markets where there's very limited competition, and in particular where there are monopolies, economic regulation exists to try to replicate the good things that you get from competition. So the good things are customer service, efficiency, innovation, long-term investment. And so our kind of core role is to try to replicate the effect of a competitive market by focusing on those elements. Now, we know water is different. No one's talking about a competitive market or having competition, but those factors are still important. We want to see the right level of investment, the right level of long-term planning, a focus on doing the best possible with consumers' money and delivering the right long-term outcomes.
So I guess that creates quite an important relationship between you guys as the regulator and also the water entities themselves. How does that relationship work?
The first thing is it's a long-term relationship. So once a sector is subject to economic regulation, particularly if it's an essential service like water or energy or telecommunications, generally it's going to be regulated for the long term. And so we and the entities need to develop good working relationships. And those are important because there will be times when we don't like what the entities do and the entities won't like what we do. But if you've got a standing working relationship, you can have a conversation about it. You can understand where each party is coming from and you can try and reach a solution.
And Andy, where does your sort of boundaries start and stop, sort of, or what aren't you doing in terms of economic regulation?
So we're focusing on the things I mentioned up front, and I think probably in particular for water, I think we see asset management as being at the heart of things, and the entities need to understand the location of their assets, the condition of their assets, and have a long-term strategy which feeds into investment. What we won't be doing is running the business for them, running the entity for them, telling them exactly what to do. We will be focused on outcomes and delivery, how they go about that, how they structure themselves, what sort of management teams they have, particularly is up to them. And equally, we're not going to manage their stakeholder relationships for them. So we expect all the regulated entities of essential services to engage effectively with their stakeholders. We will consult stakeholders, but if there's been no engagement up front, that will cause a problem in terms of our approach to regulation. So it's really important that the entities bring stakeholders with them.
There's a focus on those outcomes that you're looking at rather than necessarily the process that they're going through of the day-to-day running of the business.
Yeah. So it's about delivery of outcomes. It could, in some cases, be delivery of particular projects. So if a lot of money is being spent on bits and pieces of infrastructure to deliver an outcome, then we'd want to know whether the infrastructure is actually being delivered in the timescale that it's that the entity said it was going to be delivered. But the reality is that a lot of money will need to be spent on water infrastructure. Ultimately, the end consumer will be paying the cost. So the entities really need to bring consumers with them and consult them properly. And we mean all sorts of consumers and all sorts of stakeholders. So from households through to medium-sized businesses through to big businesses and different stakeholder groups. And in particularly iwi, Māori, Hapu, each entity needs to engage in the right way with those groups.
And to do that, presumably you're going to need some information from those entities. Is there particular stuff that you're expecting?
Yeah, so the heart of the regime, probably the heart of any regulatory regime, but I think particularly in New Zealand, is something called information disclosure. So we are expecting to have quite strong powers, like we've got in other sectors, to require entities to publish information. So not just to send it to us, but to publish information. And the information will include asset management plans. It will include information on performance, and we expect the entities to engage with their stakeholders on that information, as well as the Commission doing its own analysis and playing back some of the information to the entities. And that will include some comparisons and benchmarking to generally show what we think the state of play is over time.
So Andy, where do we stand now in terms of the overall journey? We've had Bill 2 that sort of set some of the direction for you. Where do we stand now?
So as you say, we've got a transitional role in Bill 2. That also includes us being the Crown Monitor for water care. So the government's put in place a specific regulatory regime for water care and has made the Commission the Crown Monitor. And so with that hat on, we will be monitoring water care's performance against a charter. And the DIA, the Department of Internal Affairs, is developing that charter in consultation with us and Auckland Council. And so we'd expect that to appear relatively soon, sort of in the next few months. And we'll be monitoring water care quite closely. And that's more like just a traditional economic regulation role. The other part of our transitional powers is essentially about information disclosure and setting up information disclosure for any new entities that are created, but also thinking about what is the sort of basic suite of information that we will need all those providing water infrastructure services to make publicly available in the sort of phase 1 of the longer term economic regime. And then for the longer term, Cabinet has discussed the overall regulatory framework. I think the Cabinet paper is public, and the government machine is working on the long-term legislation, which we are expecting to be laid before the House before Christmas. And then it's up to the House how long it takes to pass it. But I think the aim is to try and get the legislation passed by next June. And essentially, the long-term regime has a number of flexible regulatory tools which we can deploy over time. But as I said before, the basis, the starting point is information.
Do you think that the role with water care is that sort of set up as a temporary thing, or is it more of a blueprint for how the regulation in the water industry might go forwards?
So I think we're keen to point out it is not necessarily a blueprint, because it's happening now, and we're still gearing up to the long-term regime and want to understand more about the particular needs of particular water entities. But we will undoubtedly learn a few things through that role, which will help us with the longer-term role. The idea is that there will be a Crown Monitor for water care until the long-term regime kicks in. So we're still talking about how long that role will last, and it will all depend on the legislation. But it is a relatively short-term role. But I think we and hopefully water care will learn quite a lot through that process.
So I guess in light of all of that, we've already got a few regulations or regulators around in the water sector. We've got Tāwara ROI, who've been up and running for a couple of years now. And then we've also got regional councils who quite frequently regulate in other areas, especially around consents. How do you see the relationships? Presumably there's some quite strong relationships going to be needed between the ComCom side and Tāwara Arawai. How do you see that working?
Yeah, so it's absolutely right. We need strong relationships. We need to be joined up. Otherwise, it's not great for, well, ultimately for consumers, but particularly the entities if we're at cross purposes. And we've got a really good relationship with Tāwara Arawai. As everyone knows, there was a previous water regime which started, so we were gearing up for that one. And we've had sort of meetings with Tāwara Arawai at different levels, including board level, for a couple of years, so possibly a bit longer. So we do have a really good relationship. We seconded one of our team to Tāwara Arawai last year, so it's really important that we maintain that. We've also had some engagement with regional councils, but we need to do more. The role of regional councils, I think, has changed a bit between the old legislation and the new legislation, or is likely to change. But it's important that we establish ongoing kind of communication and channels so that we can just be aware of different perspectives. But I think, the doing it, but also when we talk to other regulators in other countries, I think they emphasize the need for the different forms of regulator to be talking to each other.
Yeah, and presumably there's some boundaries because you wouldn't want to be overlapping and trying to regulate the same thing. So you've got some particular focuses within.
Yeah. So I think there are probably some natural overlaps, but what you don't want is, say, for Tāwara Arawai to ask for information in one form and then we ask for the same information in a different form, because that just imposes cost, causes unnecessary confusion. So we are talking to them regularly. We started later than Tāwara, so we need to sort of get our heads around exactly what we want, but we talk to them on a weekly basis about what we need, and we're currently talking to them about the ways in which the entities should upload the information and whether we can try to be more joined up on that front. And it's about talking things through. So if we get into asset management information, we need to talk through sort of what we need and what Tāwara needs. If you're talking about water quality, if it's about the water itself, that's Tāwara. If it's about the infrastructure and the effect of the infrastructure on the quality, it's us. And so we need to just talk that through and work out what it means.
Which I guess is the exciting part of where we are now, is kind of setting up those boundaries and understanding how it's going to look as a form between you both as separate organisations going forward.
So it's about us as regulators understanding how we work together and where the boundaries are, but then we both have to communicate with the sector so that everyone else understands what we're doing and whose role is what. And I think one of the reasons for doing this podcast is that we appreciate that a lot of people don't understand what economic regulation is. They might have a greater understanding of Tāwara Arawai because they've been around for a bit longer.
What are some good examples of economic regulation in of utilities generally, or of other water sectors around the world? I presume you've been looking hard at Australia and the UK and other places. What have you found there, Andy?
So if we talk generally, then I think for any kind of heavy infrastructure, then as I said before, asset management is at the heart of it. So ensuring the right obligations on understanding of asset condition and a long-term strategy, and then the question of how that long-term strategy feeds into investment plans. That's probably at the heart of it, and we recognise that will take time, but we see that as being critical. And then having the right sort of metrics on performance. And so one of the lessons that I took from regulating rail in the UK, we've heard from Australian regulators as well, is what you don't want is a simple indicator of something like asset condition, which might tell you the condition of a particular asset, but won't give you the wider picture on the asset as a whole, because that can be misleading. It can mean that all the focus and resource goes on this indicator because the regulators put it in place, and that indicator could show a positive picture, but actually there could be all sorts of other features of asset condition which are going wrong, and which people don't recognise because there's too much of a spotlight on the first one. So it's about having a holistic picture of asset condition and having the right metrics. So the metrics that mean something, that can develop the right sort of pattern over time, and where the information can be easy to collect. Different regulators, particularly different water regulators, have different approaches to the level of detail they see, and I think we need to understand sort of what we need to see in a New Zealand context, and that's where we need to sort of get our heads around the sector and any particular New Zealand features. Obviously, in the UK, there's been a lot of focus on Ofwat and the financing of the entities. So we're keen to learn any lessons there, but I think we need to recognise that the concept in New Zealand is different. No one is talking about privatisation. The entities will be council owned. So I think some of the issues faced by other regulators probably won't be relevant to us in New Zealand. But we want to learn as much as possible from other people so that we're not creating things from scratch unnecessarily, but equally we need to make sure it's in the right context for Aotearoa.
And in Aotearoa, can you, I guess, point us in the direction? There's other utility sectors that do already have some economic regulation going on. For those who aren't aware of it, where could they be looking to see where it's already happening here?
So I'm General Manager of the Infrastructure Regulation Branch at the Commerce Commission. And within my branch, we currently regulate electricity networks, gas pipelines, Chorus's fibre broadband networks, and also the smaller broadband networks, and also the three main New Zealand airports, so Auckland, Christchurch and Wellington. Outside of my branch, we also regulate telecommunications markets, fuel, where there are some good examples of how information disclosure has been used to provide much better information for consumers. Bank retail payment systems, groceries, so supermarkets, which is a recent thing, and dairy, which is a slightly niche thing within New Zealand. So I'd say the best starting point would probably be to look at electricity.
So because we talked about information disclosure being the main approach, at least to start with, how do those slightly more complex approaches, how would they be applied to water going forwards if that was to be the case?
Yeah, we start with information disclosure, and then, obviously it all depends on the legislation, but we're expecting various sort of tiers that we could switch into. So one tier is quality only regulation, which is actually something we don't have in electricity, but which we'd like, which would be to have the same broad quality standards applying to everyone providing the service, so that consumers, wherever they are in New Zealand, can look at the performance of their water entity and compare it to others. So that's one tier that we could see being switched on. Another tier would be some specific performance measures and metrics, which we would be able to hold the entities to account for delivering. And then you get into the more detailed, sort of heavier form of regulation, where we would scrutinise business plans, look at expenditure, and set quality standards at the same time. But the other sort of feature that could come in through legislation is we might look at sort of minimum investment levels for water entities. That's something that's being discussed at the moment, and I think it was mentioned in the cabinet paper, where it sort of recognises the historic problem where there probably hasn't been enough investment in water infrastructure, and so giving us the power to set a minimum level based on the information coming out from the water entities is something that we could do.
So there might almost be two roles for you, making sure that enough gets spent and making sure that not enough gets spent as well, not too much gets spent.
Yeah, but I sort of go back to our role versus the role of the management teams of the entities, in the primary responsibility is on them to make sure that they know what they should spend and then they spend it at the right time. But we will be monitoring it, we will be shining a light on what they're doing, and we will come out and say if we think there's a problem.
And presumably that also reflects on what rates are and what they're charging the consumers, as well as how much they're spending.
So another feature of the regime we're expecting to see is what's called ring fencing. So basically money that consumers pay for water should be spent on water and not disappear and be spent on other activities. to make sure, and the idea is to make sure enough money is spent on water infrastructure now and in the future. So we'll also be monitoring that.
Thanks, Andy. Just before we close, is there anywhere that people should go to find out a bit more in the meantime?
Yeah, so please have a look at our website, which has got some information on our role in water, and we'll be putting more and more stuff on the website in due course as we develop our thinking and as the legislation takes effect. And also look out for me or a member of the team, because we're aiming to talk to as many people as possible. So we'll be talking to local government, New Zealand, and we'll be doing webinars and other podcasts. So please first check the website, but please also look out for us. And if you see one of us, please just feel free to come and ask us a question.
Thanks very much, Andy. It's been really interesting talking to you today. Hopefully we're able to come back in a few months once we've got a bit more information about the regime and have another chat about some more of the detail. Thank you for listening to this latest episode. We'll be back next month with the next podcast.